When people think about Star Trek, they usually think about warp speed, alien planets, and Captain Kirk giving dramatic speeches while gripping his chair like the ship is about to fall apart. But what a lot of people don't realize is that the original Star Trek for 1966 wasn't just another sci-fi TV show. It was a bold experiment that almost never made it on air, broke a ton of rules, and quietly changed television forever. Behind the colorful uniforms, shaky sets, and iconic sound effects, there are some seriously wild behind-the-scenes stories. Some of them are inspiring, some are hilarious, and some honestly make you wonder how this show survived it all. So today, we're diving deep into the history of the original Star Trek and uncovering 20 hidden facts that even longtime fans might not know. So sit back, imagine the hum of the Enterprise engines, and let's boldly go where trivia videos usually don't. Fact 1. Star Trek was almost canceled before it ever aired. Before Star Trek became a cultural phenomenon, NBC almost pulled the plug on it immediately. The first pilot episode, called The Cage, starred Jeffrey Hunter as Captain Christopher Pike instead of William Shatner's Captain Kirk. When NBC executives watched it, they weren't impressed. They thought it was too intellectual, too slow, and way too serious for American audiences in the mid-1960s. Most TV shows that failed their pilot test were simply thrown away and forgotten. But something unusual happened here. NBC didn't cancel the show outright. Instead, they ordered a second pilot, which almost never happened in television at that time. That second pilot, Where No Man Has Gone Before, introduced Captain Kirk in a slightly more action-focused tone. Without that rare second chance, Star Trek would have died before Episode 1 ever aired. Fact 2. Captain Kirk was meant to be more than a space cowboy. A lot of people remember Captain Kirk as the guy who punches aliens, kisses women from every planet, and solves problems with his fists. But that's actually a simplified version created over decades of pop culture jokes. The original intention was very different. Gene Roddenberry wanted Kirk to be a thoughtful, philosophical leader who balanced emotion with logic. In many episodes, Kirk isn't rushing into battle. He's negotiating, questioning authority, and wrestling with moral dilemmas. He often seeks advice from Spock and McCoy before making decisions. The idea was that leadership wasn't about brute force, but about listening, reasoning, and responsibility. Over time, reruns and parodies exaggerated his aggressive moments, but the original scripts show a much more complex character. Fact 3. Spock was almost removed because he looked too weird. Believe it or not, Spock almost didn't survive the early days of the show. Network executives hated his pointed ears and green-tinted skin. They thought he looked too scary and strange for mainstream audiences. NBC reportedly told Gene Roddenberry that if someone had to go, it should be Spock. The reason Spock stayed had a lot to do with Leonard Nimoy's performance and audience reaction. Early test audiences were fascinated by the character, especially his calm intelligence and emotional restraint. Eventually, NBC backed off, and Spock became one of the most iconic characters in television history. Ironically, the thing executives feared the most became the heart of the entire franchise. Fact 4. The famous uniform colors were chosen for TV technology. The red, gold, and blue uniforms weren't just style choices. They were selected very carefully because of color television technology in the 1960s. At the time, color TV was still relatively new, and producers wanted shows that looked vibrant and exciting to encourage people to buy color sets. The bright uniforms helped characters stand out against the gray and metallic ship interiors. Interestingly, Captain Kirk's uniform is often remembered as gold, but it was actually more of a greenish yellow. Lighting and early color cameras made it appear gold on screen. The color choices weren't just fashion, they were a marketing strategy for the future of television itself. Fact 5. Uhura's role was quietly revolutionary. Nichelle Nichols' character Lieutenant Uhura may not have had as much screen time as Kirk or Spock, but her presence was groundbreaking. In 1966, having a black woman portrayed as a skilled communications officer on a starship was almost unheard of on American television. She wasn't a servant, a background extra, or a stereotype. She was a professional. Nichelle Nichols once considered leaving the show because her role felt limited. But Martin Luther King Jr. himself encouraged her to stay, telling her that Star Trek was showing the future he believed in. He explained that her character represented equality and hope in a way no other show did at the time. Because of that conversation, she stayed, and television history was changed forever. Fact 6. The interracial kiss almost didn't happen. One of the most famous moments in Star Trek history is the kiss between Captain Kirk and Uhura in the episode Plato's Stepchildren. It's often cited as the first interracial kiss on American television, though the history is a little more complicated. Still, it was undeniably bold for its time. NBC executives were nervous about airing it, especially in southern states. They tried to compromise by filming alternate takes where the kiss didn't really happen. William Shatner intentionally ruined every alternate take by crossing his eyes or messing up the scene. In the end, the network had no choice but to air the real kiss. It became a powerful statement that quietly pushed social boundaries. Fact 7. The show was always about social commentary. Even though Star Trek is set in space, many of its stories were really about issues happening on Earth. Racism, war, nuclear fear, authoritarian governments, and civil rights were all woven into the scripts. The alien planets were often metaphors for real-world problems. Because the stories were set far in the future, the show could explore controversial topics without directly offending viewers. This approach allowed writers to ask big questions about humanity, morality, and power in a way that felt safe but still meaningful. In many ways, Star Trek was one of the smartest political shows on television, disguised as science fiction. Fact 8. Budget problems forced creative storytelling. Star Trek never had a big budget. The show constantly struggled with money, which forced the writers and directors to get creative. That's why so many episodes take place on the same ship sets or reuse alien costumes with slight changes. Instead of relying on flashy visuals, the show focused on dialogue, ideas, and character interactions. Some of the most memorable episodes are basically philosophical debates with a sci-fi backdrop. What started as a limitation became one of the show's greatest strengths. It proved that good storytelling didn't need massive effects. Fact 9. The transporter was invented to save money. One of the most iconic elements of Star Trek is the transporter beam effect, but it wasn't invented because it looked cool. It was invented because they couldn't afford shuttle landing scenes. Filming a shuttle taking off and landing on different planets every week would have been extremely expensive. So instead, the writers created the transporter as a quick and cheap way to move characters from the ship to a planet. The visual effect was relatively simple and saved the production a ton of money. What started as a budget shortcut became one of the most recognizable sci-fi concepts ever created. Fact 10. Red shirts weren't supposed to die so much. The idea that anyone wearing a red shirt is doomed became a running joke years later. But originally, red wasn't meant to signal danger. It just happened that many background characters wore red uniforms, and when the story needed someone to die, it was usually a lesser-known character. Over time, audiences noticed the pattern and turned it into a meme long before memes were a thing. The writers never intended to create the red shirt curse, but it accidentally became part of Star Trek lore and pop culture history. Fact 11. Spock's Vulcan nerve pinch was a last-minute idea. The Vulcan nerve pinch wasn't in the original scripts. Leonard Nimoy came up with the idea on set because he didn't think Spock would solve problems by punching people like everyone else. He wanted something more controlled and logical. The move became a defining trait of Vulcans and reinforced Spock's alien nature. It was a small improvisation that had a massive impact on the character and the entire franchise. Sometimes the best ideas come from actors who truly understand their roles. Fact 12. The show was almost saved by a fan letter campaign. By the end of its second season, Star Trek was on the verge of cancellation. Ratings weren't great, and NBC didn't think the show was worth keeping. But fans loved it, and they made their voices heard in a big way. Thousands of letters were sent to NBC begging them to keep the show on the air. This was one of the first major fan-driven campaigns in television history. Because of that response, NBC renewed Star Trek for a third season. Even though the budget was reduced, the show survived long enough to become legendary. Fact 13. Gene Roddenberry lost creative control. During the third season, Gene Roddenberry stepped back from day-to-day production. He was burned out and frustrated with the network. As a result, the tone of the show changed, and many fans feel the quality dropped. Despite this, some interesting episodes still came out of Season 3. But the loss of Roddenberry's guiding vision is often cited as one of the reasons the show ended after only 3 seasons. Ironically, it would go on to live forever in syndication. Fact 14. The show became popular after it was canceled. Star Trek wasn't a massive hit when it originally aired. Its true success came later through reruns. In syndication, new audiences discovered the show and its fanbase exploded. People who missed it during its original run suddenly had access to it every day. College campuses, science clubs, and fan conventions embraced Star Trek as something special. This delayed popularity is what eventually led to movie spin-off series and a global franchise. Fact 15. The term Trekkie started as an insult. The word Trekkie was originally used mockingly to describe obsessive fans. But fans embraced the term and turned it into a badge of honor. Over time, it became a symbol of passion and community. Star Trek fandom helped shape modern fan culture, including conventions, cosplay, and fan fiction. The idea that fans could deeply analyze and celebrate a fictional universe was still new in the 1960s and 70s. Fact 16. The show inspired real scientists. Many real scientists, engineers, and astronauts have credited Star Trek as their inspiration. The show presented science as something exciting and hopeful rather than scary or destructive. NASA even invited the cast to events, and the first space shuttle was named Enterprise after a fan campaign. The line between science fiction and science fact became surprisingly thin. Fact 17. Women played stronger roles than most shows. For its time, Star Trek gave women more authority than many other TV shows. Female characters were scientists, doctors, and officers. While it wasn't perfect, it pushed boundaries that other shows wouldn't touch for years. Majel Barrett's Nurse Chapel and Grace Lee Whitney's Yeoman Rand represented different aspects of professionalism and vulnerability, making the ship feel more realistic and human. Fact 18. The Klingon were meant to represent Cold War enemies. The Klingon weren't just random villains. They were inspired by Cold War tensions, especially fears about rival superpowers. Their militaristic culture reflected anxieties of the era. Over time, Klingon evolved into one of the richest alien cultures in sci-fi history. But their origins were deeply tied to real-world politics. Fact 19. The show created the blueprint for sci-fi TV. Before Star Trek, sci-fi on television was usually low-budget and silly. Star Trek proved that science fiction could be intelligent, emotional, and socially relevant. Its episodic structure, recurring characters, and moral themes became a template that countless shows followed later. Fact 20. Star Trek's greatest legacy is hope. At its core, Star Trek was always about hope. It imagined a future where humanity had overcome its worst instincts and worked together for the greater good. That optimistic vision is why the show still matters today. In a world full of uncertainty, Star Trek reminds us that the future doesn't have to be dark. It can be thoughtful, inclusive, and curious. So that's 20 hidden facts about Star Trek 1966 that prove it was way more than just a sci-fi show. It was a risk statement and a dream about what humanity could become. If you enjoyed this deep dive, hit like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments which Star Trek fact surprised you the most. And until next time, live long and prosper.